Dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Hey man, we got a Mr. Ballin' for us today, man. We got They Found His Hat and the rest of him. And then the rest of him.
They found his head. And then
she thinks she gonna do it better than me. And she already stumbled as soon as she started.
Okay, come on.
Like what kind of system?
My head all over the place.
It is.
People done got me discombobulated. Okay, let's go.
Y'all, that's why. Never mind. We on YouTube. My bad. Let's go, y'all. Let's check it out. Let's see what's about. You ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
One morning in early November of 1888, a conductor drove a steam train through the woods outside of Chantilly, France. And everything was business as usual until the conductor noticed, way up ahead, just next to the tracks, there were these two maintenance workers, waving frantically at him and pointing at something that was on the ground on the tracks. The conductor couldn't really tell what they were doing, but he squinted and looked ahead, trying to figure out what was on the ground. And when he saw what it was, he lunged for the brakes. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to go to the movies with you. But when you get there, be sure to tell the ticket checker about all the secret candy the like button is sneaking in. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the evening of November 2nd, 1888, a 45-year-old man named Hippolyte Hoyos got dressed in a 3-piece suit in the bedroom of his very cramped apartment in Paris, France. In the next room, he could hear his wife, Alphonsine, cooking dinner, while their 3 young kids ran around playing. And even though this really should have felt like a happy, idyllic moment, Hippolyte instead felt this pang of worry, because keeping this family afloat was his responsibility. And recently, he'd had a very hard time doing that. So Hippolyte had grown up on a farm in Belgium, and when he was younger, he'd gotten into some trouble with the law and basically had a really tough time kind of finding his way in life. But about 10 years ago, he had moved to France and he had met Alphonsine, and he also found a steady job running a farm for a wealthy French noble in the countryside. Now, Hippolyte knew a lot about agriculture. He'd grown up on a farm. So in theory, this job really should have been perfect for him. But the problem was, no one on the farm really liked him. And it was true, he'd been very strict with the farmhands. But a lot of them had taken that sternness and they had gone to their boss and complained about him, saying that he was overbearing and very difficult to work with. So last month, when Hippolyte's contract was up and he was expecting his boss would renew it, his boss didn't. And so now Hippolyte's perfect life, this amazing life he had built for himself here in France with Alphonsine, felt like it was falling apart. And so following not getting his contract renewed, Hippolyte and his wife and their kids had moved to Paris so he could look for other work. But luckily they'd also found this very cheap but luckily furnished apartment just the week before, so they at least had a place to live, but Hippolyte still needed work. Now, this new neighborhood they were in, understandably, because it was so cheap, it was largely full of, working class people. And there were lots of factories and lots of warehouses. So it was sort of a little bit rough and tumble compared to what Hippolyte had become accustomed to working for this nobleman out in the countryside. I mean, Hippolyte, he wasn't crazy about the area. He had expensive tastes, even though he didn't have an expensive budget. However, Hippolyte knew that this whole situation was just temporary. Because after all, he was about to come into a huge windfall, and he actually had to travel outside of Paris right now to actually get the money, which was what he was currently getting dressed for. And so on this trip, his friend, 52-year-old Louis Baron, would be accompanying him, at least for a portion of the trip, because he was going the same way for a job interview that Hippolyte had actually helped set up for him. Now, Louis was also from Belgium, and so he had known Hippolyta for a long time, but things were tense between them at the moment. Hippolyta had arranged for Louis to work on the farm that he used to manage, but when Hippolyta was fired, it had also cost Louis his job there as well. The reality was, Louis was quite furious. I mean, he was really upset about it, to the point where Hippolyta had actually helped pay for a room at a hotel just a few blocks away from his apartment in Paris for Louis. And he'd even let Louis borrow one of his suits to wear to this job interview. And so really, Hippolyta was hopeful that by the end of this trip he was going on, his buddy Louis would finally just stop being mad at him. That was causing lots of problems. So now, after getting dressed in his fancy suit, Hippolyta packed up a bag with some extra clothes and some cash, and he put on a hat. Then he went into the kitchen to kiss Alphonsine goodbye. She kissed him back, but she definitely seemed a little bit anxious, and Hippolyta figured she was just thinking about being left alone with their 3 small kids. So he just reassured her that, this trip, this was all going to be worth it. Like, don't worry about a thing. I'll be back soon. Then he said goodbye to the kids and then left for the train station. Just after dark that night, Hippolyta stepped off a train at the station in Chantilly, which is about 30 miles north of Paris. Louis was with him and already dressed for his interview in the suit that Hippolyta had given him. And as the 2 men walked across the platform, Hippolyta noticed that Louis was moving sort of slowly and awkwardly, like he was uncomfortable in the suit, like he wasn't used to dressing that way. The men left the station on foot and continued walking down the road towards Senlis, the little town where they were both spending the night. It was about a 6-mile walk to get there, and once they got outside of Chantilly, the road was surrounded almost entirely by woods. It was dark and it was late, so there weren't many people that were out and about, and the 2 men didn't talk much, so the walk was very quiet. Eventually, as they were approaching Senlis, they came to this narrow stone bridge with metal railings on either side that passed over a railroad track. And as they reached it, Hippolyta heard this rustling in the trees. He stopped and he listened, and as he did, he felt his heart start to pound because this whole walk has been just like eerily quiet. And so to hear anything was just sort of alarming. But as he stood there listening, he couldn't hear it anymore, so he decided he must be imagining things. Now, Louis did not appear to hear the sounds at all, and he was still walking ahead across the bridge. So Hippolyta, he took a deep breath and then hurried onto the bridge to catch up with him. The next morning, 2 road maintenance workers were hauling a gravel-filled cart down that same wooded road that connected Chantilly and Senlis, the road that Louis and Hippolyta had been on the night before. And so these workers were looking for potholes that they would fill in with this gravel. And so they're moving along, they're filling in potholes, and then eventually they got to that narrow bridge by Senlis. And when they did, one of them noticed a man's hat lying near the bridge's railing. And as they got near the hat, they looked on the pavement and saw these dark splatters of blood. Now, the workers were immediately on edge. They're looking around. They don't see anybody. But at some point, one of them looked over the railing. And when he saw what was down below, he immediately shouted that they had to go tell the police. Later that morning, a judge named Jean Auberton walked down a small hill by some railroad tracks. At the bottom, a police officer and 2 road maintenance workers stood next to the tracks, staring down at a dead body. So in France at the time, judges were responsible for leading investigations instead of police. So Auberton would essentially function as the lead detective on this case. And all he'd been told so far was that a body had been found on this stretch of train tracks, and he really didn't know what to expect beyond that. When Auberton reached the group down below, the police officer explained that the 2 workers, the road maintenance workers, had found the body that morning. They'd flagged down a train conductor who had stopped just in time and then waited for them to move the body off the tracks, and then the conductor kept going in his train and notified the police at the next station. And so Auberton, he knelt down to get a better look at the body. And, right away he could tell that it was clearly a man with blonde hair and that he was wearing a nice 3-piece suit, but that was really about all he could conclude, because his face was just completely mangled, and his head was almost completely severed from his body. Many of his teeth were also broken, and there was also a deep gash on his left foot near his ankle. Now, at first glance, Auberton wondered if he had just jumped off the bridge and got hit by a train. But when he looked closer, the pattern of the wounds on his face just did not look like they'd been caused by a train. These were long, distinct gashes going in multiple different directions. It looked more like this man had been attacked with a sharp weapon, like an axe or something. And Overton's best guess was that whatever happened to this guy very likely happened the night before. There wasn't much decomposition, and this railroad line got a lot of traffic. So the body couldn't have been here for very long, or another train conductor would have seen him earlier, or maybe wouldn't have seen him and then run him over, and then, his body would be completely mangled. As Overton stood up, one of the workers told him that they had seen blood up on the bridge. So Overton, he climbed up the small hill onto the bridge, and he saw that hat that was lying by the railing, and then just a ton of blood all around the hat on the ground. And to Overton, there was so much blood up here that he figured his theory that this guy was attacked had to have been right here. He very likely was attacked right here on the bridge. And he either fell over the edge during the assault, or maybe after the assault, his killer threw his body, maybe to make it look like a suicide, or perhaps to dispose of evidence. And so at this point, Overton felt pretty much certain that this was a homicide, and he knew he would have to identify this victim as soon as possible. Mr. Ballenpie.
Add time.
On the afternoon of November 4th, 1888, the day after a man's body was found mangled in the woods near Senlis, France, Judge Overton walked down a busy street in a working-class part of Paris. Now, by this point, he'd already gotten the autopsy results back, but they didn't really tell him much that he didn't already know, which was that the victim had been killed by multiple strikes from a sharp weapon, like a hatchet. Now, even though the body itself had not given Overton too much to go on for this investigation, the clothes that the victim had on had given him something. Overton had spent the past day piecing together clues that he had found in the victim's pockets, including a piece of paper with an address to a location in Paris and the initials HH embroidered on a handkerchief. And at this point, Overton knew what HH meant. It was the initials for the victim, Hippolyte Hoyos. Overton had gone to that address in Paris from that piece of paper, and he found it belonged to an acquaintance of Hippolyte's. And this person had not only identified Hippolyte, but also he gave Overton Hippolyte's last known address, where he had lived with his family. And Overton was right outside of that address now. But as he looked up at the building that matched the address he'd been given, he wondered if he had the wrong place. The man whose body had been found was wearing this really nice suit, and looked like he was upper class, based on the suit. And this was definitely not an upper class place to live. This was not a nice area. But Overton went inside anyways, and he walked up a flight of stairs, and then he knocked on the door of the apartment number that he'd been given. Seconds later, a very tired-looking woman answered the door, bouncing a toddler on her hip, and Overton asked her if this was the home of Hippolyte Hoyos. And the woman just kind of frowned and said yes, she was actually his wife, Alphonsine. Overton kept it simple and just said that he was a judge and he was conducting an investigation, and asked if he could come in. Alphonsine got this uneasy look on her face, but she nodded and said come on in. Once they'd both sat down at the dining room table, Overton told her that the investigation he was doing was for a homicide, that a body had been found in the woods near Senlis, France, and he believed, unfortunately, the body belonged to her husband, Hippolyte. And to Overton's surprise, Alphonsine just didn't seem very upset at all. She just sat there expressionless as Overton went on to explain a little bit further, what actually happened. That, the body had been found on some train tracks, and it appeared like that he had been attacked. Someone had clearly killed him. And as Overton did this, he kept waiting for Alphonsine to cry or gasp or really show any emotion, but she just didn't.
Crazy.
And Overton couldn't decide whether this was suspicious or if, this woman was just in shock. So after, laying out why he was here, he began just asking her questions to get a better read on her. So he asked her, when was the last time you saw your husband? And she just began to speak. She said it was the evening he had left for the train station. He was going to Belgium to collect the inheritance from a relative who had died recently. She said that she'd been staying home and taking care of their 3 kids since then and hadn't heard anything from him since he had left. To Overton, this explained why Ippolita was found in Senlis, because Senlis was about halfway between Paris and Belgium, so clearly he was on his way to Belgium. However, as he was internalizing this new information, he was interrupted by a very loud gasp. And he looked at Alphonsine to see that she had sort of broken out of her muted state and was staring at him with really wide eyes like something huge had just occurred to her. And she told him, maybe her husband had been on his way back with all the money he got from the inheritance. And she said, maybe he was killed by a robber. Now, Overton, he considered this, and a robbery did make sense to him. Ippolita was very well dressed, and there hadn't been any money in any of his pockets. But this whole interview with his wife just felt really off. Alphonsine didn't seem at all confused or rattled or upset in any way. And now, just literally moments after finding out that potentially your husband has been brutally murdered, like he's dead, she's begun pitching theories of how he was killed. Like she was trying to point the finger at someone else right away. It just felt off. Now, to Overton, Alphonsine did not really seem like she could have been the one to actually kill Ippolita herself.
No.
She's clearly here alone with 3 young kids. And, this took place in Senlis. And more than that is Ippolita was a pretty big guy. And he clearly had been overpowered by somebody or maybe multiple people. And, Alphonsine was quite small. However, if she was involved and maybe hired someone to carry out a hit on her husband, well, that would cost presumably quite a bit of money. And considering the low quality nature of where they lived, it just seemed unlikely to Overton that she would be able to afford paying a hitman. And so at this point, Overton didn't think that Alphonsine was a particularly strong suspect, but at the same time, he couldn't completely rule her out. However, one thing he was definitely sure about, just based on a gut feeling here, was that Alphonsine knew something more than she was telling him.
Indeed.
That night, when Judge Overton got back to the courthouse in Senlis, he walked down the hallway toward his office and saw a police officer waiting at his door. And this officer told him that they'd arrested a man that afternoon whose name was Etienne Bouillot for the murder of Ippolita Hoyos. Overton's heart began to race, and when he heard Etienne was in a holding cell in the jail right next door, he told the officer to take him there right away. As they hurried down the hallway and out of the courthouse, the officer explained to Overton that a group of police had been out at the crime scene near Senlis collecting evidence, and at some point they'd passed Etienne sitting in the woods nearby. And as soon as he saw the police approaching, Etienne had just started running. And so the officers had chased him down and they had caught him, and when they did, they noticed he had blood on his pants and on his jacket. They also found a bloody handkerchief that was in one of his pockets. Now, the officer said that Etienne had claimed he was hit by a cart the night before, and that was why he was covered in so much blood. But the police were just not convinced, especially because Etienne refused to give them an alibi for where he had been the night Ippolita was actually killed. And so the officer and Overton, they get to the jail and they go inside, and when they reach the holding cell, Overton saw Etienne sitting inside, and he was wearing very shabby clothes and looked like he might be homeless. And so Overton, he goes inside the cell, and Etienne, he's just sitting there, he's not saying anything. And Overton, he just sits down and begins going over all the evidence that they had. And a lot of it made it seem like Etienne was their guy. And at some point, when Overton was done sort of going over what they had, he told Etienne that, "You're basically our only suspect at this point." So unless he could give Overton an alibi for the night of November 2nd, the night that Ippolita was killed, then unfortunately, Etienne was very likely going to be charged with murder. At this point, Etienne just sort of looked down for a moment and then let out this long, defeated sigh, like the reality of his situation was really settling in. Eventually, he looked back up at Overton and he mumbled that he did have an alibi. He said he had spent the whole night sleeping at an inn in Chantilly. He said the reason he hadn't told the police this is because he actually left the inn without paying. And that's also why he had run from the police when he was seen in the woods. He thought they were there to arrest him for theft. Overton looked hard at Etienne. He wasn't sure if he believed him, but he wrote down the name of the inn and planned to go out there and verify Etienne's alibi first thing in the morning. A week later, Judge Overton walked down a street in Paris, in the same working-class neighborhood where Ippolita and his family lived. He was on his way to check out a lead that he really hoped would reinvigorate his investigation, because over the last week, the case had completely stalled. Etienne's alibi had checked out. The inn's owner verified that Etienne had stayed there that night, and at some point he had left without paying. Now, this did not completely rule Etienne out, because he could have left his room without anyone noticing to go commit this murder, but it did make it seem much more likely that Etienne was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And since Etienne, Overton hadn't gotten any more tips about this case until that morning, when he'd gotten word that one of Ippolita's friends was missing. This friend was a Belgian farmer named Louis Baron, who had come to France to work with Ippolita. And this friend, Louis, hadn't been seen in over a week. Basically, since the murder, he's been missing. And so to Overton, the timing here was just too perfect to be a coincidence. And so now the judge was looking into Louis as a possible suspect who maybe skipped town after killing Ippolita. Overton came to a stop outside of the hotel where he had heard Louis was most recently living, which happened to be just a few blocks from Ippolita's apartment. The judge went inside and approached the front desk and asked the manager if a guest named Louis Baron had been around recently. And the manager said that yes, they definitely knew who Louis Baron was, but he hadn't been here in about a week. The manager said that the last time he had seen him, he was leaving the hotel on the night of November 2nd. And when he said that, Overton perked up, because that was the same night that Ippolita was killed. Like, again, the coincidence was just too much here. And so the judge quickly asked the manager, like, what else can you tell me about Louis? What kind of person was he? Who did he hang out with? Like, give me anything you got. And the manager clearly didn't know Louis particularly well, but he did say that there was one person he saw Louis with all the time. And often these two people were arguing in the lobby. Now, the manager said he didn't know who this person was, but this other person that Louis fought with appeared to be a middle-aged man with blonde hair. Now, to Overton, he's thinking, clearly, you're referencing Ippolita. Like, that sounds like Ippolita, this guy. And so he asked the manager, like, did you ever overhear what these guys were fighting about? What were the arguments about? But the manager said he really didn't know. He said that, he couldn't ever hear what they were saying. It just always seemed like when they were talking, it was like kind of heated. And he could really tell that Louis appeared to despise this other guy. Like, it was much more Louis hating this guy than the other way around. The manager did tell Overton that occasionally their arguments did get so bad that it almost became violent. And in fact, the manager at one point or another had to break them up, like physically separate them. But even still, he didn't know what they were fighting about. As Overton is hearing all this new information, his mind just raced. And as he looked around at this pretty shabby hotel in a rough part of town, he realized that the robbery theory might be partly right. But instead of it being some random thief, Ippolita might have been targeted by someone he knew, like Louis. And so if this blonde-haired guy that Louis was fighting with was Ippolita, then based on what the manager was saying, it seemed pretty reasonable to assume that Louis and Ippolita didn't get along. And if Louis was an out-of-work farmhand living in a shabby hotel, it wasn't unreasonable to think that he needed money desperately. And if Louis had known that Ippolita was traveling alone to go collect this inheritance, maybe he could have made plans to meet up with him on the way back and then lured him out to the woods and killed him and taken his money and then, after ditching his body on the tracks, fled to avoid being caught. And if Louis really did have all that inheritance money on him, with all that cash, he could be anywhere by now. And so Overton realized he might never find him.
I better find somebody.
BetterHelp is the paid partner.
God dang, how many ass balling got, bruh? Balling, you out here balling on us for real.
A couple of weeks later, in late November of 1888, Judge Overton sat in his office at the Senlis courthouse reading a telegram from a police sergeant in Belgium. Police all over France and Belgium had been searching for Louis Baron for weeks now, but this telegram was bad news just like all the others. This one said that no one in Louis' hometown had heard from him since before Ippolita's murder, and there was still no sign of him anywhere in Belgium. Overton sighed and began flipping through a stack of notes from the investigation. Louis was the strongest suspect because he'd completely skipped town on the same day Ippolita was killed. But he also hadn't ruled out Alphonsine. She'd acted incredibly suspicious when Overton spoke to her, and now Overton had discovered that she actually might have lied to him. He'd looked into the inheritance Hippolyta had supposedly gone to collect in Belgium, and he couldn't corroborate any of the details that Alphonsine had given him. So the judge had looked into this inheritance that Hippolyta had supposedly gone to Belgium to collect, and so far anyways, he hadn't been able to corroborate any of the details that Alphonsine had given him. Like, they hadn't found any record of this relative who supposedly died recently and was the one passing the inheritance to Hippolyta and his family. Like, this person just didn't seem to exist. And then there was Etienne, who'd been found at the literal crime scene, covered in blood. But he'd had an alibi. And since this was 1888, DNA analysis didn't exist, so Overton had no way of proving that that blood was Hippolyta's or his own or somebody else's. And so as Overton was racking his brain, trying to figure out what he was missing, there was a knock on his door. And so Overton got up and he opened the door and he saw a man in a nice suit standing there. And the man asked if Overton had a few minutes to chat. He said it was about Hippolyta's murder. Now Overton didn't recognize him, so he was a little confused, but he needs some leads here. He needs progress on this case. So he said, yeah, come on in, let's chat. And so they sat down and this well-dressed man explained who he was. And then he launched into this incredibly wild story that at first didn't seem to have anything to do with the murder case. Then it was like all at once, Overton realized that what this man was saying was the key to his entire case. Based on all the evidence, which included letters and witness interviews, this is what police believe happened to Hippolyta Hoyos on the night of November 2nd, 1888.
I think it was set up for sure. I don't know.
I think it was a setup.
Once it was totally dark out, the killer walked down a quiet, deserted road in the forest between Chantilly and Senlis, and as they walked along, they were absolutely buzzing with anticipation. The plan they'd been working on for weeks was about to be completed, and their victim had no idea what was coming. Up ahead, there was this bridge, this narrow bridge that went over some railroad tracks, and on the bridge was a man in a three-piece suit, and he was the target. The killer knew this man was worth a fortune to them, and so all they had to do now was just kill him, and they, the killer, would be set for life. And so carefully, trying not to make a sound, the killer began hustling toward the bridge, and as they did, they reached into their jacket and they pulled out a hatchet. So finally they got to the bridge and they crept up right behind their victim, and without the man even noticing, the killer raised the hatchet and brought it down on the back of this guy's head. And then after that, they hit him over and over again with the hatchet until the man stopped moving. After that, the killer put away their hatchet and then lifted this man's body up and dumped it over the railing, and it fell down below. And then the killer, they walked off the bridge and turned around and went down the hill down to those railroad tracks, and they grabbed the body of their victim and dragged it and placed the body on the tracks. They were hoping that by doing this, it would look like, this guy was hit by a train, not murdered. But before the killer could actually flee the scene, they first had to do one more thing, just to make sure they wouldn't get caught. And so they reached into their own pocket and they pulled out two items, a handkerchief and a piece of paper with an address on it. And they stuffed both of these items in the jacket pocket of their victim, and then the killer fled. The victim was not Hippolyta Hoyos. He was the killer. It would turn out the body that the investigators thought belonged to Hippolyta was actually Hippolyta's own friend, Louis Baron.
Shut up.
I thought
So
about that.
Hippolyta and his wife Alphonsine, they conspired to murder Louis and make it appear like his body was actually Hippolyta's body. Because just a few months before the murder, Hippolyta had taken out a life insurance claim on himself that in the event of his death, Alphonsine would be paid a huge sum of money.
What
But
the
Hippolyta had no intention of dying. They needed somebody else to die on his behalf. And it just so happened that Louis actually already looked an awful lot like Hippolyta, like strikingly similar. And so Hippolyta lured Louis out to that deserted stretch of road in the woods on the way to a job interview, which was just pretext to lure his friend out there to be isolated. And there, Hippolyta butchers his friend with the hatchet, kills him, and after hitting him over the head a bunch of times on the bridge, he flipped him over and hacked his face apart with the hatchet as well, just to ensure his face would be so badly mauled, nobody could recognize him. Ippolito also put that handkerchief and that note with the address in his pockets, which, by the way, he's literally wearing one of Ippolito's suits that he so, kindly allowed his friend to use for the job interview. It was a setup. He put those items inside of the suit and he's like, boom, now the police are gonna find this body, they're gonna think it's me, here's all this evidence that will suggest it's me, and I'm gonna get off scot-free. But Ippolito and his wife, Alphonsine, had left one big loose end.
What'd they do?
And that loose end was the well-dressed man who had walked into Judge Oberton's office and basically cracked the case wide open. The well-dressed man at Oberton's door was the president of an insurance company. And he told the judge that Ippolito had been shopping around for a life insurance policy just 2 months before his sudden murder, and that his insurance company had actually flagged Ippolito's application as possible fraud. And so they had not given him the policy. But he would tell Oberton that apparently after this failed attempt, Ippolito just reached out to another insurer who did take the bait. And as soon as that contract was signed and suddenly Ippolito had this policy, Ippolito supposedly died. And so after hearing these details from the president of this company, Oberton ordered the body to be exhumed and re-examined. And this time, when the body was compared against photos, investigators confirmed it was in fact Louis. The real Ippolito was tracked down in the north of France, where he was living under Louis's identity. He was charged with murder, and on June 15th, 1889, he was sentenced to death.
What the fuck?
Wow. Oh, he was sentenced to. Oh.
Yeah. Wow.
So back then, like, did they not do anything? Cause with the wife, cause she was in on it too.
She was.
Child, this is too much.
God,
this is too much. I was not thinking that. That never came across my mind. Oh, he faked his own death and took it. Never.
But you said all of that for money.
And didn't get nothing.
There's so much evil shit that goes on behind money, and he still get his death.
Still. So I wonder, does she get the policy? Since he still. Oh.
Well.
I don't.
Nah, or she'll have to pay it back.
Oh, if she did, recoup something.
Yeah, she'll have to get that back. They must have been in hella debt.
Had to. Struggling, 3 kids.
Well, what the fuck he do? And then y'all was, you know what? They also was planning and preparing just in case people noticed that they came into money. He went to collect money from a rich family member in Belgium.
So they had to have a story, just in case people
there probably wasn't even nobody richer than.
It wasn't because they investigated. They couldn't track anything down that he had any relatives that was leaving him money or something, whatever.
Damn, that's insane, bro. You see man, it's hard to trust people out here in this world, bro. People would literally kill you, and you don't even you talking about a backstabber? That is literally backstabbing.
Like, a good friend.
It's smiling in your face.
You know what I'm saying?
Whole time trying to take your place.
Backstabber.
Damn!
For
Damn! When you really think about it.
Real. Facts though.
They smile in your face whole time. They trying to take your place. Backstabber. He literally took his place.
For real. Like. Legit.
And stabbed him in the back. Technically. Back of the head.
He thought, man, he was going to an interview, thinking you his friend, thinking you helping him. And the whole time you plotting and planning to take this man's life.
Man.
Oh my gosh.
You can't make something like that up, man.
Rest in peace to Louis.
Facts.
Like, what? Rest in peace to that man.
Oh, man. But, hey, y'all spam us up in the comments, man. Let us know y'all thoughts about it in the comments down below for us, man. But, until next time, y'all know how it go, man. I do go by the name DJ New Kid. This is. We are. We out.
Time to kick it, got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar. Let me watch out for my